Thank you very much, Nolan. Thanks to all of you for being here, and welcome to the third annual Utah Solutions Summit. I'm really grateful to have all of you here with us today, and thanks to the Solutions Summit partners, all of whom helped make this event possible. We have a truly exceptional lineup of speakers and panelists today, and I'm very honored to be with you bright and early to help kick off this discussion. I want to make clear at the outset that I think it's really cool we're holding this at the same time and in the same building as Comic-Con. I've been a huge fan of Star Wars since I was about 7 years old, and never thought that I would ever be in the same building with Luke Skywalker himself. But I'm not sure which idea pleases me more, the idea of someone from Comic-Con mistakenly ending up at our event, or one of our attendees walking into Comic-Con and thinking that an event called the Solutions Summit, put together by Senator Lee and a few others, has gone Star Wars and Star Trek and all other things Comic-Con. It could be really fun. The Utah Solutions Summit is one of the few days each year that I really look forward to, for the specific reason that I know that I'm going to learn something that's new, that's interesting, that's helpful, and that's informative. I know that I'm going to meet interesting people with interesting and uplifting stories. And I know I'm going to engage in a positive and productive dialogue about real solutions that we're facing within the Utah economy and across the country. Now, for most of you, this probably sounds like a very typical day, but you have to remember most of the time I work in Congress in Washington, D.C., so that makes this event truly unique and truly different for me. The focus of this year's Solutions Summit is workforce preparation, which is something that we happen to do extraordinarily well here in Utah. Utah has one of the lowest poverty levels in the country and has the lowest level of income inequality of any state in the United States of America. Our economy is ranked second in the nation for job growth last year, and CNBC recently named Utah the very top state for doing business in America in 2016. This is a good thing. In addition to the incredible array of homegrown Utah businesses, every year more and more companies, from small startups to global multinational corporations, want to start calling Utah home. And we see this virtually in every industry, from outdoor retailer organizations to advanced manufacturing to high tech and to life sciences. We see companies from all of these areas, large and small, from across America and throughout the world, wanting to come to Utah. Now, there are a lot of good reasons for this, and a lot of good reasons behind Utah's strong, vibrant economy, a lot of good reasons why so many of these companies want to work here, and so many of their employees are glad to be here. Our state and our local governments are effective, efficient, responsible, and focused on solving problems, not creating them. And of course, electric power is affordable here, and so too is the cost of living, especially when you compare the cost of living and the cost of electric power to many coastal cities where startups are finding it too expensive to run their business, and families are finding it too costly to raise their families. Finally, we have some of the smartest, hardest working people on the planet, and we're supported and educated by world-class parents, teachers, and instructors. All of this really points to what I think is Utah's true secret, what is really the key to Utah's success. It's the people. It's about the people here in Utah. It can be easy to take this for granted if you're from Utah, but when you travel outside the state, as I do every week, you realize just how unusual and how extraordinary the people of Utah are. Utahns are more than just good workers. They're great citizens. They're friendly, they're neighborly, they're courteous. In fact, it almost starts to sound like the Scout Law when you recite it, but I won't go through all of that. We look out for one another, and we help each other in times of need. We realize that the only way to make things work is to work together. We realize here in Utah that freedom doesn't mean you're all on your own. It means we're all in this together. That's the kind of cooperative, enterprising spirit that led a group of teenagers from Harriman, students at Harriman High School, to move to establish that city's very first Chamber of Commerce. And this is something they did just this year. Historically, the city of Harriman never had its own Chamber of Commerce. Harriman was small enough, and it was close enough to other places in the Salt Lake Valley that it could just rely on the South Valley Chamber to help promote its businesses. That's just the way it had always been, and a lot of people assumed that it's the way that it always would be in Harriman. But that changed when 3 high school students dared to be different. They saw a need, and they decided to try to fill it. A few months ago, Hannah Peterson, Maren Murdoch, and Keenan Budd realized that the old way was no longer working for the people and businesses of their community. Harriman has become one of the fastest growing cities in Utah. And so on that basis, these high school students decided that it was time for Harriman to have its own Chamber of Commerce. These students met with business leaders and city officials to get the chamber up and running, and they quickly learned that it didn't matter who they were, and it didn't matter how old they were. What mattered was that they had a good idea, and they also had the determination that it was necessary to turn that good idea into a reality. I understand that Hannah and Keenan have since graduated, but Maren is here with us today. Maren, would you mind standing to be recognized for your accomplishment? Oh, good. Let's give them a hand. So if anyone ever asks you how it is that Utah became such a popular destination, one of the most popular destinations in America for venture capital funding, for pioneering businesses, and for companies of all shapes and sizes and purposes, just tell them the story of Hannah, Maren, and Keenan, and it'll all make sense. They'll understand at that point. But despite Utah's many successes, we're all here today because we know we can do more. And we know that we need to do better. We need to continue to do better if this kind of success is going to continue. And of course, it must and it will. And we're going to do everything we can to make that the case. Utah still has an incredible reservoir of untapped potential. We still have more room to grow and prosper together. The question is, will we have the workforce that we'll need in order to get us there? Will we continue to be able to supply the type of people that would-be employers very much want and need well into the future? Will manufacturing, technology, and life science companies continue to see Utah as the best place to find skilled workers to meet future demand? These are the questions that I know that you and your organizations have been working on and thinking about for many years. Lane Beattie and the Salt Lake Chamber's Prosperity 2020 are striving to ensure 2/3 of Utahns achieve post-secondary training by 2020, and I commend you for that, Lane. Nolan Karras and Education First want to make Utah one of the top 10 education states in the nation. And Governor Herbert and his Governor's Office of Economic Development are doing everything they can do to make sure businesses are creating and maintaining jobs here in Utah. We need to keep this discussion going and to find new ways to work together, to continue to be innovative and to continue to be even disruptive in some cases. So the goal of this year's summit is to examine the challenges and opportunities facing Utah's workforce from every angle, leaving no stone unturned. When it comes to empowering Utah's workers, there's no one right answer, just as there are no dumb questions. By the way, I have a friend who's a professor who likes to tell his students when they say, I have a stupid question, he immediately responds by saying, there are no stupid questions, there are only stupid people. I've always wondered what exactly he accomplishes with that question, but I've always found it amusing. As a federal lawmaker, one of the questions that concerns me is how federal education policy can, in some cases, make it harder for today's students and today's would-be students to acquire skills that they will need to succeed in our increasingly competitive economy. It's impossible to know exactly what the economy might look like in the future, but we do know one thing for sure. In the 21st century, the vast majority of Americans will need some form of post-secondary education and post-secondary knowledge and skills in order to compete effectively in an increasingly technological workplace. We also know that spending 4 years at a traditional brick and ivy residential college or university is no longer the only way to get that knowledge and those skills. And if you think about it, the bachelor's degree was never the only path to career preparation. Now, this is true for at least 2 reasons. First, the purpose of a liberal arts education is not necessarily to turn students into good workers in the same sense that you're molding cogs in a big, huge wheel, but rather it's to turn them into responsible citizens who know how to think, and because they know how to think, they can learn how to work as they acquire the necessary training. But the purpose of the liberal arts degree has never been to mint someone as a newly qualified worker who knows how to perform a specific job, a specific task. Higher education should not be seen as simply a means to an end. It should be seen as an enriching and an ennobling experience. That teaches students how to think as much as it teaches them what to think. Second, most of the skills and the know-how required to succeed in a career can't simply be taught in a classroom. They also have to be learned on the job. Now, think about all the jobs you've ever held. How many of them did you learn how to do? How many of those jobs were you pre-qualified for simply by reading a textbook or simply by sitting in a classroom and listening to lectures, or a combination of those two? Now, this doesn't mean that classroom learning is obsolete. In fact, for most people and most careers, it's absolutely essential. The point is that job preparation typically requires both kinds of learning. Learning that takes place in the classroom and learning that takes place on the job. This is increasingly true in today's high-tech world, where the jobs in the fastest growing industries necessarily require advanced skills that can be learned through high-quality instruction, but ultimately can be mastered only through hands-on experience, hands-on, on-the-job learning. We also can't ignore the fact that the definition of classroom learning has changed dramatically in recent years as advances in technology have changed the way we learn. Today, technology makes it possible for students to take classes from professors even when the professor is in another state, or for that matter, even when the professor is in another country or halfway across the globe. Today, anyone with an iPad can carry a whole library around in their backpack. But the diversity of students' life circumstances today also means that not everyone's education will fit within the credit hour system or the traditional academic year. That's why we're seeing so many vocational schools, apprenticeships, distance learning options, and specialized training programs like computer programming and coding boot camps springing up across Utah and throughout the country. These newer higher education models are flexible enough to accommodate the working mom or the stay-at-home dad whose unique and busy schedules give new meaning to the term full load, full course load. These definitions are changing now because of this. But unfortunately, the vast majority of students are restricted from accessing these essential post-secondary markets because of our outdated federal policy governing higher education accreditation. And given the way that accreditation system interacts with our federal higher education financial assistance programs, I think it has created a problem that we need to solve. Under current federal law, students who receive federal financial assistance are prohibited from enrolling in any school or training program that isn't approved by one of the nation's recognized accreditation entities. But many of today's most innovative education providers don't look, feel, or operate in any way like a traditional brick and ivy college or university. So those programs, those entities find themselves locked out of the accreditation process. And anyone who needs federal assistance is locked out from accessing these new sources of knowledge and of skills. But it's important to remember it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to set it that way. These principles have evolved gradually over the last few decades, but they weren't handed down to us on stone tablets. We can empower students to access federal financial aid dollars and the school or training program that meets their needs. We can, in fact, do both. In fact, a bill that I've introduced in the Senate would do just that. It's called the Higher Education Reform and Opportunity Act, or HERO Act. That's the acronym. By the way, that acronym turned out much better than many of my legislative acronyms. A couple of years ago, I introduced a bill called the Family Fairness Opportunity Tax Reform Act. The acronym was FFATRA. It's helpful in some ways in Utah because if you say it fast and angrily, it sounds like a fake swear word. So HERO Act worked out much better than FFATRA. Anyway, the HERO Act would allow states to create their own alternative systems of accreditation. And then those alternative systems of accreditation could be used in place of the traditional federal system of accreditation, allowing the programs recognized through a state accreditor to participate in federal higher education financial aid. So proposals like the HERO Act are sometimes described as forms of disruptive innovation. But that misses the point. The disruption of higher education has already happened. It's already upon us. It's here. Alternative education models already exist. And we already know that they already work. The HERO Act would simply allow states to validate their existence and to empower more good teachers to teach and more willing students to learn and to benefit from the many opportunities that these kinds of programs necessarily provide. And that's ultimately why we're here today. Each person at this summit is someone who has dared to be different, dared to be bold. You have challenged the status quo and sought ways to help prepare yourself and those in your workplace and your community to succeed in the 21st century economy. But I want to challenge everyone here to be even better. I want to challenge you to think about all those individuals you haven't yet reached. Maybe it's the single mom who lives down the street and is just barely scraping by, juggling multiple part-time jobs. She wants to become a nurse, but she doesn't have the time, even if she had the money, to go back to school on a full-time basis. Or maybe it's the young man who's waiting tables at your neighborhood restaurant, who dropped out of college after falling behind. He wants to be a manufacturing technician, but with all of his student loan debt, he can't afford the transition from the restaurant to the shop floor. These men and women are no different from Hannah, Marin, and Keenan of Harriman High School. They have big dreams and high hopes for their future. So the question for us today is this: what can we do, individually and together, to help remove the obstacles in their lives and empower those who are being left behind by today's status quo? You see, because figuring out the answers to these questions is really what gets us out of bed in the morning. It's why we do what we do. It's why we're here rather than at Comic-Con. Not for our own personal satisfaction or convenience, but to make a difference in someone else's life and to help others fulfill their own God-given potential. As a representative in the United States Senate, I pledge to you that I'll do everything I can at the federal level to help remove the obstacles to a good education and to quality job training that are currently preventing so many Americans from pursuing their dreams. And as a fellow Utahn, I invite all of you to join me in this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Lee. We're going to move now to a panel discussion, workforce needs now and tomorrow, and those who are participants need to come on the way up. We have Derek Miller will moderate, who's with the World Trade Center Utah, Elaine Beattie from the Salt Lake Chamber, Josh Brown, Utah Mining Association, Todd Bingham, Utah Manufacturers Association, and Richard Nelson can't be here today. Chet Linton, the chairman of the Utah Technology Council, is going to represent him. I understand Richard had a little bicycle accident. So gentlemen, take your seats, and Derek, you got it.
Thank you, Nolan, and thanks to Senator Lee for putting this Solutions Summit together and for all the sponsors and all who've participated in today's event. This is such an important topic, as you will discover, not just from this panel, but throughout the day. As was mentioned, I'm Derek Miller with the World Trade Center Utah, and I'm privileged to be able to moderate this panel. There'll be no stupid questions or stupid people on this panel. I actually went to law school with Senator Lee, and so I know exactly which professor he's talking about. And that professor said that to me a lot. He never said it to Mike, but he did say that to me a lot. So thank you again, Senator Lee, for putting this together. You will see that a panel with a depth and a breadth of experience has been assembled. And so let's just jump right into it, dealing with today's topic on highlighting the current state of affairs as it relates to workforce here in Utah, as well as the current and future trends and where we're headed. I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves, the organization that they're representing, and that'll give you a context for the expertise that they're bringing to the conversation today. So Chet, let's just start with you and move down the line.
All right, Derek. Chet Linton, I'm the CEO and president of the School Improvement Network. I've been there for the last 25 years. And I'm here as chairman of UTC. I've been the chair for the last 3.5 years, very much involved in some of the issues that Senator Lee spoke about. So it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Todd Bingham, president of the Utah Manufacturers Association. As Senator Lee indicated, a unique location today. I had a 6'6" Wookiee steal my waffle in the parking lot, so it's good. I could stand to miss a meal or two. But Utah Manufacturers Association, we represent about 1,000 manufacturing companies across the state, everything from food to consumer products to electronics, outdoor recreation, energy, industry, mining. We cross all spectrums, so happy to be here and talk about what we're doing to work on workforce.
Thanks, Todd.
Hello, I'm Josh Brown, representing the Utah Mining Association. Last year I served as chairman for the Utah Mining Association, which happened to be our centennial year, so 101 years in the state of Utah. Currently I'm employed at Rio Tinto. I'm head of government affairs. Spent a lot of time with both manufacturers and the Mining Association. And mining is currently in kind of a state of a flux, a lot of challenges, a lot of changes, but a very crucial kind of part of industry. 13 to 14% of the GDP, which equates to $14 trillion is attributed to mining. So very large contributor with a population of roughly 0.25% of the workforce. So a lot of GDP input and a sizable amount of employees.
Elaine Beattie with the Salt Lake Chamber. I represent about 8,700 member businesses across the state of Utah. Even though the name is the Salt Lake Chamber, we're actually a statewide chamber. We have membership in every county in the state and represent literally every type of business that there is in the state of Utah, which is at times a little difficult because we have to balance a few things here and there on different issues. But it also gives us a great breadth. I also serve on the board of directors for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Lane, and thanks to all of our panelists. We've got about 30 minutes together this morning, and so I want to just jump right into it. First question that I have deals with how Utah is taking its place in the global economy. And I want to ask each one of our panelists to address the question of, based on the organization and the industry you're representing, how do you feel that Utah's workforce is currently measuring up against our competitors? And in a global economy, it is a competitive environment. That's not just our competitors industries in Arizona or even in Canada and Mexico, but it truly is around the world. Chet, you want to start, and we'll just go down the line again?
You bet. You know, we have 5,000 tech companies in Utah, and we like to think that they're all growing at very rapid rates. One of the big challenges that is facing us here is, of course, workforce. I know all the organizations represented deal with that. But there are some great things about Utah as we see this environment changing. Of course, we know the governor's going to speak today, and he'll talk about Utah's been the #1 place to live and work for a number of years. We've had the highest in the first 6 months of this year. The Utah technology companies had the highest percentage of hires nationally. But we still struggle with some of the other challenges that seem to face not only us, but the rest of the country as it relates to tech jobs and filling those opportunities. And so there's great things in Utah that bring people here, but globally, as you asked, Derek, we're seeing that the shifts and many companies looking outside of the state to open offices. We opened an office in Cebu about 4 years ago, in the Philippines, and to find talent. And we realize that even though we have that talent there and it helps us, Utah is very competitive with the quality of life, the cost of living, and people still want to be here. Even our employees in the Philippines would love to move here as well. So we've got to be we're very sensitive to what's happening globally, and as UTC, very concerned about how many of our members are seeing the need to open offices, not only in other states, but also in other countries.
Thanks.
You know, I would echo some of the comments that Chet made. When we talk with our board of directors and we talk about important issues for manufacturing in the state and the growth that we're seeing, workforce development comes up as #1. I spent some time with my colleagues around the country, and it wouldn't surprise you to know that it's the #1 issue for most states. And Utah has some unique advantages. I know we're going to talk about a few of those things. I was at one of our manufacturing companies yesterday, and they have 54 open positions. 54 current open positions in manufacturing. And that's not uncommon to see a medium-sized to large-sized manufacturer with that many jobs open that have been open for a number of months. And those range from everything from entry-level tech positions that require a 1-year certificate to 2-year certificate, all the way up to operations managers. And so it's a challenge. In a global economy, I think what we're seeing is it's having an impact on our ability to expand and grow. And we often hear the governor speak, and we hear the accolades from GoEd, and we're doing an absolutely marvelous job in Utah of growing the economy. One of the things our companies are saying, the only thing that's holding them back is the ability to find workers. 3.4% unemployment is fabulous, unless you're looking to hire 50 people. And that's where the challenge comes in. And so I think that's what we're here today, is to talk about innovation and solutions to how we grow that piece of the pie, how we compete with Mexico. A lot of manufacturers moving back from China into Mexico, so it's getting closer, that labor force, to coming back into the U.S., and we can certainly use that labor force, but we want to have the labor force here in Utah as well.
Todd, let me ask you a follow-up question on that, because all of us here have heard about this reshoring of manufacturing jobs and sort of this manufacturing renaissance, if you will, that's happening not just in Utah, but of course across the United States. What's driving that, and then how does that interrelate with workforce skills development training?
It's a combination of things, Derek. You know, over the last 20 years, we've seen the cost of labor rise in China in particular. The middle class has grown, and as that's grown, the cost of labor has gone up. Transportation costs has been a certain impact for companies that are manufacturing parts overseas, and then added to that transportation cost would be the uncertainty regulatory environment in China and getting those products in a timely manner over here to be then manufactured. But we certainly are seeing a big effort on reshoring, and one of the biggest things that manufacturers are doing and have done for 15 years, but are becoming, specifically in Utah, the best in the country, the best in the world at it, are looking at their operations and becoming lean. So they look at their operations and determine, how do we eliminate waste inside of that manufacturing process, and if they can be 4 times more efficient than the manufacturer that's producing the product in China, they can bring that product back to the United States and manufacture it here in Utah.
Great, thanks. Josh?
Thanks, Derek. Todd brought up a lot of comments, lots that are similar to mining. I mean, workforce development is very large. especially if we look at the craftsmen, the tradesmen, your electricians. Those jobs seem to be very much tied to the baby boomer generation, and as those retire, we definitely see a very large gap. We see a large gap for essentially the next 20 years, and the way mining and most industries ebb and flow, as certain industries hit well, a lot of people go into those type of degrees, get that type of education. Well, currently we're into that piece where we were flooded, it's dropped off, so we see a large several-year gap coming in the mining industry for having the roles to meet the needs of mining throughout the U.S. as well as the rest of the world. An interesting piece we've also had that mining versus other industries don't tend to have is you don't really pick where you're going to locate your mine. So once it's here, it's here. The difficulty is it's a very globally competitive environment. So someone that works in Salt Lake this week could very easily move to Perth, Australia to take a increase in salary, which as certain areas boom and bust, they pay substantially well compared to other parts of the world. Mining itself, I think, is twice the average pay in the state of Utah. I know that Rio Tinto sits around in 2012, the average employee made, I think, $90,000 a year, roughly. So it's a very well-paid career path, a very good job to have. It's a very competitive in that workers are very mobile. An interesting conversation we often have is getting people to come to Salt Lake as a, air quote, mining camp is one of the terms that I hate that it's often called, but it's described as this excellent mining camp. People come here, realize they've got ballet, theater, professional sports teams, recreation, right outside your doorstep, and we get them in the door and no one wants to leave. So I think the workforce is excellent. It's just focusing that attention on having them come to this location and stay, whether it be Utah or other parts of the U.S. And then we often get stymied to that with the regulatory environment. So mining doesn't get to pick where it's located, but the time to permit and regulate, I think U.S. tied with Papua New Guinea as the top 25 mining nations in the U.S. for the longest time to permit. So there's a lot of opportunity to improve that process, as well as focus, I think, on showing the benefits of getting employees here, working on developing that tradesman group, which is always a difficult task, and I think sustaining that mining future.
So,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Nope, you're good.
So you're saying that mining camps in places like Mongolia don't have symphonies and ballets and the Utah Jazz?
That is correct. There's a large mine in Mongolia. It will be, I think, essentially the largest copper producer in the world, and it's roughly a third of the GDP of that nation once it's fully up and running. So huge contribution. You recognize if it's got a third of the GDP, that means infrastructure, everything, schools, all need to be developed, and that's a very big draw globally for that type of mining career to go to that, developing a whole new nation, if you will.
Excellent. Lane?
Thank you. We recently had a survey done of I forget how many thousand employers across the state participated in this, but what was interesting is when the information came back, 71% said that qualified employees was the number one issue that they had, and 32% of that 71% said that the most critical issue is their ability to hire, determining on their economic future. And so both of those issues obviously come together to I think, orchestrate just a little bit more why it is so absolutely critical. You know, a lot of accolades go out to the business community across the state, and for a lot of reasons, and a lot of very justified reasons. But it's also important to understand that one of the reasons why we have that is because we have a strong educational base, and yet we're struggling in that education. You'll see some initiatives coming up in the next couple of years that are absolutely critical for the state of Utah so that we can actually have those kind of employees that we need to help fill the jobs that are available to be able to support their families. That being said, you look at our higher education. Dave Bueller, who leads that, is probably one of the top in the entire country in being able to retrofit and to look, as Senator Lee said, as he started today, looking at a new way of doing things in our higher education, and that goes on to our Utah technology colleges, because it's not just a certificate or a degree. Either one of those may be extremely important in the industry that you're in. And never before has there been more emphasis placed. And now with one of the great emphasis of public education, even down into junior high school, getting kids to start getting excited about where their future is going to be.
So let's dive a little bit deeper there and talk about some of the shifts that each one of you alluded to, some of these changes in industries. About 12 years ago, Thomas Friedman, noted New York Times columnist, wrote this famous book, The World is Flat, talking about innovation. I'm sure many of you have read about it, or at least pretended that you have. And talking about innovation and how that is creating this flat world. Consider for a moment that that book was written 12 years ago when there were less than 400 million users of the internet worldwide. Today, over 12 years later, over 4 billion users of the internet worldwide. But not just innovation in the information technology, information revolution we've been living through, but innovation within each of your industries, and talk about how that has changed workforce needs. And let's start, Chet, with you.
Well, it's, of course, a major issue. The advantage of the technology is it really has flattened the world. So we can have an office in the Philippines and have teams that collaborate and communicate and do everything that our teams do here. And incidentally, we've been surveying, after we've been doing this for a while, our team, and overwhelmingly, people are saying, if we had a choice, we would keep all of that here in Utah, because there's still an advantage to have these, especially our software developers, those engineers working closely together. They believe that it can accelerate a lot of the work that they're doing. So we're actually looking at this issue right now and the challenges that come along with it. But the technology has enabled us to really look at doing things that we really wouldn't consider, I think, 12 years ago at all. And the big issue then becomes, as we've already talked about, workforce here, can we outsource that workforce? And I think in order for us to be competitive, and in UTC, one of the things that we found is that we have 25% of the membership looking outside of the state to open other offices because the talent shortage is so short. So regardless of the technological advancements, it doesn't keep people here. And as wonderful as the state is, it doesn't keep the businesses here, because we've got to keep up. Because we had 75% of membership that said, if we can't find workers, it delays our production, it slows our economic growth as a state radically as it relates. So while the technology developments have really helped flatten the world, it's given everybody a lot of flexibility to push those dollars not only out of the state, but out of the country as well. I know that's not exactly what you're asking.
Well, no, I've talked to those business owners as well, and they want to hire people here in Utah. It's not like that they want to go outside of the state and hire people, but often they're forced to because they've got to find the talent. Of course, if they can't find the right workforce, nothing else matters. We've got a great business environment in Utah, but if we can't find the talent here, nothing else matters.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And what we're finding, and I think to echo some of the other comments, it's not just, it used to be software developers or engineers. We need those engineers, and there's been a lot of great work at the state capitol to help address that issue, but now it's spread to salespeople, product managers, and other aspects of our normal ecosystem within a company that we've got to figure out how to address. So,
Todd?
Derek, you talked about innovation, and I think, let me just put a little twist on what I think innovation has done for our industry on twofolds. One, our companies are cleaner, faster, leaner, more efficient. They produce products today that produce your quality of life. If you look around this room, everything in this room is either grown, mined, or manufactured, period. Even ourselves. So that's a whole other discussion. But innovation has changed the face of industry. And the one challenge that's come with that is that as our companies have become more automated and become more efficient, today's generation doesn't see industry as a career. And they still have the vision of manufacturing from 50 years ago. It's the saying, they don't know what they don't know. And as I sit and talk to my sons that are in that millennial age, the only reason they know about the manufacturing industry is because of me, and we'll get a chance to talk about some of the initiatives we're doing, but I think they just don't understand what jobs are in manufacturing. So as innovation has increased, perhaps we as industry have not done as good of a job as we should of informing today's workforce why they should come to work for us, what jobs are available in the industry. That Rio Tinto has one of the most amazing locations and facilities for tracking everything in their mining trucks. I mean, everything, and to minutes away to when something's going to happen with a mining truck, fluid temperatures, you name it. That is high tech in an industry that sometimes is seen as dirty, dangerous, and dark, and that's the way manufacturing is perceived. I think image in our industry is having the largest impact on our ability to recruit talent, and it's not that we are your grandfather's manufacturing industry. We're entirely different than that. Today's generation just doesn't grasp that concept. We have to change that.
That's a great point, because you can go to a place like I Am Flash, and I know Micron is one of the sponsors today, and of course they have clean rooms. But you can go to the manufacturing floor of Boeing, where they're building, the wings out of this carbon fiber material and doing this advanced manufacturing. You would think you were in a clean room. I mean, you could have surgery in there.
Absolutely.
It's like a hospital.
Yeah, and I would even take it below that. We've got a couple of our companies are here, Lifetime and JD Machine, Matt's over here. Both companies that work with metals on a daily basis, and those facilities are amazingly clean. Rio Tinto is another example. If you walk through the refinery, you'd all be shocked at how clean those processes are. And just to put a final point on that, if you look at the emblems of Coca-Cola or Boeing or large global brands, everybody knows who those companies are. But today's generation doesn't know the jobs that are in those companies. And that's where we've got to fill the minds of those individuals with what manufacturing is, with what high tech is, with what mining is. So, and then the only question for them is, which company will you choose to work for?
Great point. Josh.
So I would concur and agree with everything that's been stated on the technological side and innovation. One piece that mining, very, a key to core to business principle, everything we do is safety. And the history of mining, you go back a long way, you recognize mining was a pretty rough and tumble, dangerous place to be. So there's been a lot of regulation put in over time, and mining has become a very safe place to work in comparison to the retail industry, for example. I think it's 10 times safer. Is a lost time or an injury statistic. What innovation and technology is done for the Mining Association, or for Utah Mining Association as well as global mining, is a step change in safety. Todd discussed a bit on these haul trucks and how innovative and advanced they are. We have haul trucks throughout the world that drive themselves. We also have interfaces where we actually, and this is not a big brother controlling us, but we have EKG monitoring of the brain when people drive certain high heavy equipment, heavy machinery, to make sure that they're active and alert. And it's a interface on the dashboard, so the individual will see if they've gone into a 1 through 5 scale, and if you're a 1 through 3, you're safe to drive. If you go above, you should recognize that you're fatigued or tired or need to maybe pull over. And these are huge opportunities to improve the safety of every day. I mean, the goal is we all come to work and we go home the same way that we started. We do not want to lose employees. We do not want to have injuries. And technology and innovation has been huge in doing that. There was a large slide a few years back at the Bingham Canyon mine. There was 0 individuals hurt. There was 0 deaths. There were 0 fatalities. There was no injury whatsoever. This was done by 8 ways of monitoring the movement of a large pit, as well as when the cleanup and burden of removing that slide went through. There were automated dozers, automated trucks that actually were controlled by as simple as an Xbox joystick that was actually done in the state of Utah, developed, which has kind of created a new way to control via remote operation. If you can take an individual and take them away from where the harm's edge of the cliff, if you will, actually is, and put them in a chair 200 yards away, controlling it with a joystick, dramatically safer and less likely to have any injury. So it's been a huge opportunity for us to improve safety throughout the mining industry.
Great. Lane.
Thank you. When you look at the issue of the world being flat and what that means to all of us, the situation is it's flat, but they're trying to change it in everything that they do today. And a lot of people think that it's only high technology that we're talking about. It's not high technology from a standpoint of some industry that is so branded. It is agriculture. It is everything that we do in the state of Utah. It's businesses that 20 years ago didn't even own a computer and are running their inventory and how they're going to order and where the trends are by a computer. These are small shops and big shops. Software, technology that gives people the opportunity to have software to actually run their finances on their company basis. Just a click of, just a switch. Last night I was watching a soccer game for a little 12-year-old grandson of mine, and my wife says, you know, remember those barn pictures that they have where they're actually quilts pictures on the sides of barns? And I said, well, yeah, I've seen those. And she said, let me show you some of them because I'd like to have some on ours. And she pulls up and she has this website. Now, this is my wife, and who honestly never sent an email out until 2 years ago. And she pulls this up, and she has these lists of barn quilts. And I said, where in the world did you get that? And she said, oh, Haven put it on my computer. It's something called Pinecrest or something like that, and Pinterest. And she said, and I said, I've heard that before. And she said, I have no idea where it comes from. And there again is the fact that even grandparents are being affected. But you look at computers. Years ago, we have a company here in North Salt Lake, Orbit Sprinkler. They're a sprinkler company. And yet they have technology that probably just developed one of the most advanced sprinkler control stations that everybody will be able to buy just in your Home Depot, to be able to monitor water. What do you think water does to the state of Utah? To be able to say that if it's 30% chance or higher that it's going to rain tomorrow, it'll shut your system off. You know how embarrassing it is for those of us that have those systems to drive into our house and have water running in a rainstorm? You know, so what I'm saying is that technology across is everything to us. And I think our younger generation, the millennials, understand that. Some of us are still learning how important that is. But the key is that we need to expose that so our kids, again, get an idea of where those jobs are that everyone has referred to here into the future. Education is a key. Let me just say this last word about technology. Our legislature, and I know that it's a real popular thing to bash our legislature. 20 years ago in the Utah legislature, every bill was only put on their desks in written form off of a copy machine paper. When I was elected 30 years ago to the Utah legislature, they told me about the new technology they had in the Senate. I said, oh, really? Where is that? And they said, well, it's the whiteboards. I said, it's what? It's the whiteboards. We now are using grease pens on a whiteboard. That was the technology they were talking about in the Senate. That's no longer the case. Every senator has a computer, every member of the House. It is broadcast throughout the entire state of Utah, so all of us in the business world get to see what is there and have positive input. Our legislature has made major steps in a very positive way, and they continue to try. The area that we as a business want them to concentrate more on is the opportunities for education at an earlier level to be able to develop the skills that they need.
Thank you, Lane, and that totally explains why in the last legislative session I saw some representatives writing with a grease pen on their computer screen. It wasn't Robert Spenlove, by the way. And even I, last weekend installed an Orbit Beehive smart watering system, and if I can do it, any one of you can do it. Let me throw this next question just out to the whole group. Each one of you have talked about some of the challenges in your industry with regard to workforce, but I just want to ask, are there any other challenges, before we shift gears a little bit, any other challenges you haven't had a chance to talk about that you want to make sure that you put out there from anyone that you're, go ahead, Lane.
May I just say immigration. Immigration is a huge issue to the advantage of the state of Utah and all of its implications. The ability to get the workforce that we have here is the difference between a company having to make a decision that I have to locate or manufacture outside of the United States if I cannot get the engineers into this company or into this country. Senator Lee talked about it this morning. We continue to have we need a solution. It needs to be a federal solution. on immigration, and that is absolutely critical for the success of our businesses as well as others in the country.
Go ahead, Chet.
And I'll put a fine point on that. It really is it's a major issue. Right now we have so much of this foreign talent that comes to the United States gets educated, and then we push them out. They want to stay here, and we need the talent. I'd rather keep the technology here on shore, by the way. The second point is that we currently have, last year we had 53% of college graduates. They are now unemployed or underemployed. So back again to this point, it's critical. I don't know if you heard the salary numbers that were related across here. In most of the tech companies, Utah will average a starting salary between $60,000 and $90,000. You heard of manufacturing jobs that are, did you say 90? And in mining, we heard 90. I mean, these are well-paying jobs. Most students do not understand what's out there. I mean, this is a major, major issue. We found as we started to participate with counselors 4 years ago and present to counselors every single year at the counselors conference, almost without exception, counselors said, we don't know what the tech jobs are in the state. How do we talk to students about it? And so we've literally had about 20 CEOs every year at the counselors conference helping them understand what the jobs are like out there. So this is it's a really big issue because we're not getting this. We have this pipeline of students that are being educated and learning. We've got a state legislature that cares about education, that wants to refine it and make it better and push our students to be ready for the jobs we need. We've got to close that gap, though, now, what happens in the classroom, what students are taught about, what discussions happen at home. It's really not the best place to go get a job as an attorney or a doctor. The world's changed, so it's a big challenge.
So let me ask you a follow-up question, Chet, on that point, because we've thrown out some numbers today. Todd mentioned our unemployment rate is about 3.5%. Each one of you have said that there is a workforce need in all of your industries, yet you're saying that over 50% of the college graduates are either unemployed or underemployed. So what's the problem? I mean, there's obviously something's not lining up, and maybe really it is just an issue of alignment.
Well, and I think to even take it a step farther, nationally we have about 2 million tech jobs that are currently vacant. We had last year the number in manufacturing I think was about 1 million. Todd, I don't know if that's changed. All requiring some kind of a technological expertise, and I'm sure mining's going to have a pretty big number as well. So that gap becomes, I think, one, it's a matter of information and helping people understand that there are great jobs in every field. And sometimes the answer, and I'm in education, is not to go get a 4-year degree. I think that's one of the problems. And the other issue is because we're not informing students about the opportunities out there, that there really can be jobs that they love and they can feel that they're contributing to society. We don't have students pursuing those avenues. And so I think a lot of it is just information, contrary to the fact that we carry the information in the world in our pocket, right? So I think there's a little confusion.
Thank you. Josh?
I've got all of us, I think, you all, if those who have children, this topic has come up in several roundtables and events that I've sat in. It's this desire to have your children go to college, have them be more successful than you, have everybody succeed. And I think it's been a generation of you go to school, you work hard, you go to college, you get a good job, you do better than mom and dad. And I think it's very difficult. I think if we were to say, by show of hands, how many have said to their child or children, hey, I think you'd be a great electrician. I think there's not going to be very many hands that go up. You might have, parents who've done it or those who are business owners and encourage their children to, follow in that footstep. But for the most part, I think we all want our children to be the doctors, lawyers of tomorrow. And it's going to be a big generational shift to have people, I think, recognize that there are very good, high-paying jobs that might not necessarily be that traditional pathway that we've all kind of grown up on and I think are doing to our children as I'm doing it to my child. So it's a game change, I guess, in a lot of ways. And I don't know if we've gotten ourselves to that level where we've prepped ourselves even internally to start saying there are a wide variety of options and availability of different types of jobs that can make a livable, good life. And that's not really an answer, but kind of a progression, a new change that I think is coming down the path.
If we have a generation that grew up and too many became doctors and lawyers, I blame Willie Nelson. Not all of you will get the joke. Go ahead, Todd.
I was just going to echo what Josh said. I think what it begins to talk about is two things. One is pathway. what is the pathway out of high school? And we're beginning to talk about that. We've had more collaboration now today with education and industry than we've ever had before. And I think that is going to be crucial moving forward, that we continue to bring industry together and sit down with education and talk about, one, what is a pathway to industry out of high school? The phrase 1, 2, 4 or more, 1 year, 2 years, 4 years or more. Education, and how do we define education? When I graduated from high school, education was defined as a 4-year degree, period. That was all it was. And from a manufacturing standpoint, for every engineer that we hire 7 tech entry-level people. It means for every job that we hire out of the 4-year college at University of Utah, we've got to find 7 other individuals with a 1-year or 2-year certificate that come in and make $60,000 a year after a year's worth of certificates. So I think we need to talk about what is pathway and how do we define education and really start to talk about that. 70% of the jobs, on average, in this state do not require a 4-year degree. They require post-secondary education of some level, and I think you could cross all of our industries and talk about what that level is. So I think it's going to take a lot of collaboration between all of us in education to really start to help parents, as Josh said. How do you talk about your child to say, maybe you should become a nuclear level welder? And we can laugh about that, but nuclear level welders in this state make into the mid 6 figures. So some of you out there are going, my son's going to become a welder. I'm going to go home and talk to him right now. Interestingly enough,
Yeah.
I'm learning to weld, so I don't blow myself up at our cabin. But I wish I'd have learned to weld when I was young.
It may not be a guarantee that you won't
No,
do both.
it's certainly not.
We've got 5 minutes left. The panel has done a great job talking about the challenges, but this is a solutions summit. So I want to, as our concluding question, ask each one of you, what are you doing in your organization, or what do you see being done in your industry to overcome some of these challenges? And Lane, let's do this in reverse this time. Let's start with you and come back this way.
You bet. There are several things that we're doing. Number one is that our focus on education is absolutely critical. And focus means that the entire business community is focused on education. And that is not just to have an advanced doctoral degree. That is exactly what Todd talked about, is the ability to be trained, the ability to go to college if necessary. But it's also extremely necessary in grade school that people understand we have got to get to a point in this state that 90% of our children are reading at grade level by the end of the 3rd grade. It ought to be mandatory. We ought to just absolutely guarantee it. Then there will be no discussion about why we're struggling with math or science or some of the other areas, because we won't be struggling if we just take care of that one issue. So that is absolutely critical. We continue to push on that. The other thing we do is partnership, again, with known entities in education. 3 years ago, the legislature came up and said, we have to be able to know exactly what you need. So education worked with the business community to give very obtainable goals as to exactly what we need to put in place, starting in elementary school and moving up. We need to follow those goals.
I would add to what Lane was saying, there's a big push in the early formative years of school. The Utah Mining Association has a 4th grade mining ambassadors program where those associated and involved with mining go into a variety of schools throughout the state and give a presentation, some show and tell type items on what mining is, what it does, how it impacts their day-to-day life. And it's been a very huge success throughout the state. We actually don't have enough people most of the time to meet the needs of the school's requests to go to their classes and teach this. We've also created a 7th through 9th grade earth science curriculum series of kind of short courses where teachers can go online, download the material, and present it to their class in an earth science type curriculum, and been very successful. But that's a 1.5 years old. The Mining Ambassador has been highly successful, but it's about, I looked at Todd because you probably know more than I would, 10 years old? Not quite 10. It's a big push. I mean, what a lot of our companies are doing, I think, is a success as well, as is recognized. A lot of these paths are going to take a few years, take some time to become a new norm. So we do a lot of in-house training. You can become a haul truck driver, which makes, if you're 6-figure type salary, and that's a series of 4 to 6 weeks of training, and that's all done in-house. There's a certification process. It's a lot of those filling the needs that we need to keep ourselves going and being efficient and getting the employees that we need.
I'll be quick. We kicked off yesterday in concert with the Utah Cluster Acceleration Partnership and Division of Workforce, Department of Workforce Services, a $250,000 PR campaign to make manufacturing your future. We're working with 8 higher education institutions and their school districts in their areas of the state to help mold the understanding of young high school seniors. Why manufacturing is a career for you. What is it? How is it different than what your parents believe it to be? This is not the candy conveyor line for Lucille Ball and I Love Lucy, and this image is to focus on that. So we're really pushing hard on
And
that
I
in
thought
schools.
my Willie Nelson reference was
Yeah.
dated.
I went back beyond that. Yeah, exactly.
Chet?
Covering for you. Just quickly, I mentioned what we're doing with counselors across the state. We've had 2 major meetings with CEOs and several of the university presidents in the state to try to coordinate and collaborate in ways that we can help make the state more enticing to keep students here and to have programs that are really integrated and focused on getting the workforce that we need. But I do think that it's critical that we as a community pull together and start collaborating and helping everybody understand that it's not just go to school and you're going to get a great job. It is all about helping students align to the pathway that's going to give them the greatest satisfaction, allow them to contribute, and really have the quality of life that you get here in Utah, that it is going to be up to all of us. I mean, that is a solution that we've got to get to. So, Derek?
Great. Well, these are wonderful insights from all of our panelists. I've been asked to provide a quick wrap-up of what we've heard here today, and I will do so in 2 minutes or less. 10 years ago, when I had the opportunity to go to the Governor's Office of Economic Development and work for Governor Huntsman, at that time, Utah had the fastest growing economy and the fastest growing population. Our unemployment rate, some of you will remember this, was 2.7%. And companies, rightfully so, were worried, concerned about the challenge of finding living and breathing employees. The discussions at GoEd at the time and the GoEd board and in the community were what could we do to attract more people to these jobs. And I remember one of the suggestions was let's go put billboards up in Silicon Valley and say move to Utah. I won't comment on the feasibility of that recommendation, but fast forward then to 2009. As a state, along with our country and really the world, we were in the depths of the Great Recession. Our unemployment rate had tripled to almost 9%. At that time, GoEd, the GoEd board, the business community, many others came together and talked about what can we do about this high unemployment rate. Out of those discussions was born Governor Herbert's goal of creating 100,000 jobs in 1,000 days, which as a community, as a state, we were able to accomplish shy of the 1,000 days. Now, fast forward once more to today. Utah is again the fastest growing economy in the country. We have essentially full employment at 3.5%. But today's challenge is not just finding living, breathing employees. It's finding employees with the skills and the training that they need for these high-tech jobs in a global economy that you've heard about today. But my point in wrapping up is simply this. Whatever the challenge is, whatever the challenge has been, Utah will continue to be a place where people pull together, people collaborate, and people find solutions to our challenges, whatever they may be. Thanks again for coming today, and please join me in thanking our wonderful panel.